All right, guys. We're going to take a quick look at a 2-to-1 stack to pot ratio now. We've got aces through fours as the linear part of the out of position strategy. We've got the condensed, uncapped in position strategy. We've got jacks through sevens as the kind of condensed part with the trap pocket aces. Okay, 2-to-1 SPR. We've got all the bet sizes available as we always do. So very quickly, what do you think the out of position strategy looks like? How does this change the behavior? What do we look, what's important? What's the most commonly chosen bet sizings? Are there jams? Are there, et cetera, et cetera? Is it like how do we characterize this? How do we organize this? How do we think about our strategy? Write some things down. All right. Write down the most common chosen bet sizing. Write down the biggest bet sizing that you think is going to be deployed. Write down or whatever you think is relevant. Okay. All right, cool. So the main thing here is that you should be very in tune with the idea that shoving will be challenged. Okay. That's going to be the thing that stands out about a sim like this. As we get deeper and deeper, shoving will be challenged. It may come in, it may not come in, but that's going to be more difficult for you to know probably. But what I want you to do is I want you to have an idea in your head that shoving is going to be more difficult. Why is shoving more difficult? Because our opponent has a nut still. Okay. Our opponent has a nut still. And essentially, when one of the ways that I've communicated this to my students sometimes is that you want to think about what game do you want to play, right? And when your opponent has the nuts at a full weight, you might not want to play for stacks. You're trying to get value. All the value comes from this part of the range, right? So really, really, really big bet sizes that leave you playing against pocket aces all the time. It's not exactly ideal. That doesn't mean that you could never jam here. All I'm trying to say is, or in a situation like this necessarily, all I'm trying to say is their value comes from this part and forcing this part to put money in, right? And so using betting strategies to force this part to put some amount of money in. And in particular, the biggest bet, what the trick is to bet as big as you can while still getting, really, you want to try to bet as big as you can while still getting these hands to put money in often. Okay. That's the trick. So with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the strategy now. So here we see out of position does not jam. 2x pot is gone. So it's too big when the opponent has the nuts here. The nuts is too large a fraction of your opponent's range. And so I was actually doing some counting. So in this model here, there are six combos. I counted them in my head. You probably heard me. And so aces is 1/6 of the range, 17%, which is so this range has the nuts 17% of the time, which is a lot, to be fair. With that kind of a nut ratio, jamming has deteriorated to the point that it's been stripped out. Okay, pot is a very viable way to try to extract value, but jamming no longer works. Okay, I just think a very important insight. Now, within that context, we can see some of the same behavior patterns that we've seen in previous sims. We see aces, kings, and queens, which clearly, well, at least pocket aces is nuts, and pocket aces is being allocated across bet sizing strategies. You see it bet pot, you see it bet half pot, you see it bet a little bit to 30%, although that's basically is rounding error, it's 0. You see it you see it block to 10%. You can also see that 30% of the sizing choice is really not relevant for this range. You could simplify and strip it out, I think. You see that the nuts bets 10% sizing choice, and it also checks, right? So the nuts is quite flexible in terms of its action profile. Kings and queens look a little bit less flexible, at least than aces in terms of their allocation to alternative bet sizes. I mean, like it really likes to bet pot with pocket kings. Pocket kings is betting pot a lot. Tens, hands that get lots of value from a certain perspective, definitely don't want to be putting into a check raise bucket. Jacks would kind of fit that description. This sim is a bit more complex in terms of the way it's handling some of these combos, to be honest. Nonetheless, it still jives reasonably well with our model where jacks and tens are very high frequency bets. They're hands that get a lot of value if they bet. Nines, eights, and sevens are being used as bluff catchers. So again, aces is the nuts. Kings through tens at this stack to pot ratio are probably hands that are really strong hands, get a lot of value, but aren't quite the nuts. You want to keep in mind also that the deeper you get, the more the nuts is really the nuts. So for example, if you have a 1-to-1 SPR, really strong hands and the nuts are pretty much the same thing. Okay. If you have a 0.5 to 1 SPR, a really strong hand is like, that's good enough, right? If you get to a 10 to 1 SPR, right, it matters if you have the first nuts, because the check raise with like the third nuts at a 10 to 1 SPR might not be great, right? So you can understand that, like, as you get to deeper and deeper SPRs, the strongest hands start to differentiate themselves more and more from like the second strongest or third strongest hands. Just kind of understand that a little bit. Okay, so we've got our kind of like not combo pocket aces. Kings through tens are kind of like really, really strong hands, although kings and queens still very comparable to the nuts in my opinion. We'll see what happens with respect. Like, they're definitely going to check raise, for example. These are definitely going to check raise still. So keep that in mind. 9s through 7s are bluff catching hands. 6s through 4s are basically hands with, basically hands that have extraordinarily low EVs, well, 0 EV. And so they're bluffs, and they are managing you have to manage the bluff to value ratio, or manage the bluff to value relationship, making sure that you don't end up overweight bluffs here, which I think is very important, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the in position strategy. All right, guys, now we are evaluating the in position strategy when check to. And the in position strategy when check to, obviously we see pocket aces, pure bets. Jacks is already indifferent between betting and checking at a 2 to 1 stack to pot ratio. So the risk of being check raised essentially has driven this combo to like neutral EV. What this means is that, aside with the exception of pocket aces, yes, this hand mixes, but no, it doesn't make money mixing. Keep that in mind. If it's checking, it means that the EV of checking is identical to the EV of betting pot. So there is no betting range here that's not the nuts. Okay, which is in contrast to the 1 to 1 SPR sim, right? So even though you could bet pot, of course, when you do bet pot, you can now get jammed on, and then you can essentially like lose the pot. So the only hand that really has a plus EV bet is aces. Isn't that kind of crazy? Because when I say plus EV bet, I mean plus EV relative to the alternatives. Okay, so obviously betting jacks in the absolute sense is profitable. That's correct. Like, you can look at this and say, well, it's betting. So betting pocket jacks in an absolute sense is profitable. Of course it is. But we're only really interested in its profitability relative to its alternative, which is checking it, because we're not going to just fold. And relative to its alternative of checking it, it doesn't matter. So there are no incremental profits gained by betting pocket jacks, right? So this betting range, by all we did was change the S stack to pot ratio. We just made it a 2 to 1 SPR, which means that if you bet pocket jacks, you have more to lose because you bet and then you get jammed on, and then you're getting jammed on by a range of value bets and bluffs, and so essentially you lose the pot when you get shoved on. You have to understand that when you bet pocket jacks and get jammed on, you've lost the pot. It doesn't matter if you call and win or fold and lose. When you bet pocket jacks and get jammed on by a balanced range, you've lost the pot, because your opponent has aces, kings, and queens when they're value betting, and they have bluffs when they're bluffing, and your EV has been reduced to 0 at that point in the hand. So it won't matter if you call or fold. They're both the EV of both answers will be identical, and I can actually illustrate this we'll illustrate this in the versus bet component that's coming up. But yeah, the only hand that bets, all we did was change the SPR, and even though you can still bet pot, the only hand that really bets is aces. The only hand that's generating EV by betting is aces. And keep in mind that most of the range is like these aces and kings and queens. These are very fractionally weighted combos. Most of the range for the other player is nines. Is nine. I just wanted to kind of show you. Go back here and show you. But aces is a better way of showing you. Aces, kings, and queens here are primarily betting, right? Most of the range is 9s, 8s, and 7s. Even though that's the case, there's still no EV in jacks, right? There's no incremental EV in jacks betting relative to checking it, right? So I think very important to, I think it's a very important sim. I think it's going to maybe confuse some people, but it's going to get some people thinking, which is good. So hopefully this one kind of like blew some people's minds in terms of the behavior change. And yeah, we can go ahead and take a look at the versus bet strategy now. Try to explain a little more of this. All right, we're now going to take a look at the versus bet strategy for out of position. And we're going to look at 2x pop. We're also going to spend a little bit of time on 1x pop, because I think that's interesting. Now, before we do, appreciate the fact that the out of position player's range has 6s, 5s, and 4s in it. So the fold percentage will not reflect our basic math problem because, of course, it's going to be those hands don't count as a part of the range because they're below the hands that we are bluffing with. Okay, so if we were to go ahead and do a quick basic math problem, we would assume, for example, that the fold percentage would be 67%. We're going to bet 200. Total pot will be 300 after our bet. We would assume the fold percentage would be 67%. Okay, but of course it won't be because 6s, 5s, and 4s will not be a part of this calculation. It'll only be 67% of the range. 67% of the range is folding, excluding. Rather, let's think about it as a defending. 33% of the range is defending, but that's not that is only hands that beat pocket sevens, right? That's the hands that beat bluffs. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we're going to we should expect to see a very elevated fold percentage here, and we do see an elevated fold percentage here. Instead of 67, we see 80, because these hands are just out; they don't count, right? They can't win no matter what happens. So there's no point to think about them. We start thinking about this range up here. Okay. So with that. When we jam, we get, when we jam our pocket aces combo, we get pure called by, more or less pure called by aces, kings, queens, and jacks. Or I guess jacks has a, see, there we go. Sorry. Jacks has a 20% fold. Sorry. So you get close to pure call by aces, kings, and queens. So these are very high frequency calls here. Jacks, 80% call. And then we're still getting a little bit of call from 9s and 8s. Keep in mind that when you jam, you're jamming aces. And so technically the EV of kings through 8s is the same. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The shoving, we're only shoving one hand for 2x pot, and it's just pocket aces, right? And 7s is the offset or the bluff. Okay, so that's the 2x pot. I don't think it's super interesting. It's worth explaining, but I don't think it's super interesting. What's much more interesting is the 1x pot, right? So 1x pot's going to follow the same rule down here, where if you bet 1x pot, you'd expect a 50% fold percentage, but of course we don't count the hands that don't beat bluffs. So we start the calculation at a different point. We exclude these hands from the calculation. And within that context, aces, kings, and queens jam makes sense, right? Because the bet pot rate range is mostly jacks. There's pocket aces in this range, but and then I'm most interested in this jam here. So once this range gets shoved on, we defend half the range that beats bluffs, which ends up meaning we have to defend. This makes sense to me, actually. So keep in mind 7s in this instance actually does beat, like our bluff beats our opponent's bluffs, which is just something to keep in mind because our opponent can be bluffing with 4s, 5s, 6s, etc. So our opponent's betting 200 to win 400. Our entire range beats bluffs. We're defending 50% of our entire range. Makes sense. So 200 over 400, 50%, full percentage 50%. Again, 7s does actually beat bluffs, like even though it's kind of weird to think about it that way, it does. And so we're defending fractionally weighted pocket jacks here, and the reason that it might optically look different is because pocket aces and pocket jacks have different weights in this range going in. Just keep that in mind. This range is mostly pocket jacks. It's not mostly pocket. It's not evenly, and it's not an even split of jacks and aces. Again, I know the graphic kind of it can be confusing for some people. Okay, so I think that this looks exactly the way that I would expect, to be honest with you. And jacks has effectively lost the hand once it gets jammed on. So again, what the main point here is that once you get jammed on, well, the EV here, the EV of calling is -7, but that's, I think, kind of anomalous to some extent. And what I mean by that is, like, the EV, if it's calling and folding and it's a mix, the EV of calling and folding is going to be basically the same. Now, yes, in this instance, it would seem to appear that the EV of calling with pocket jacks is -2%, or just slightly below -2%. I'm not really sure why this is the case, to be honest with you. That happens sometimes. But the EV is close to 0 at less than 2%. And the EV of holding is 0. So you should be, roughly speaking, indifferent between the two options when you mix. If it's for you to choose both strategies, you are essentially mixing. The main lesson here is that when you get jammed on after having bet pocket jacks, you've lost the pot. Okay. As a result of that, when you go back to the root here and you're evaluating bet, checking is not bad, because if you bet and then get jammed on, you've effectively lost the hand, right? In fact, with the way the sim is structured, if you call, you're actually losing 2%, even though it's doing both calling and folding, which is just weird. Yes, so we have a bit of a problem, which is that when we bet pocket jacks, if we get jammed on, we lose the entire pot. Getting jammed on is going to happen. It's a real 10% weight is a reasonable frequency. So it's something we're going to have to think about. And the EV of checking this hand is very competitive with the EV of betting it, such that like with a 2-to-1 SPR, the only hand that really incrementally benefits from betting as the in-position player is, again, pocket aces, which is something to think about for sure. So when you're dealing with deeper SPRs, basically you have to be more careful with your thin value bets. And the risk of being check raised is something that you really need to kind of factor into your decision making. At the same time, this also shows you like the risks of betting too small, right? So we've gone over in position bet sizing and why it would be bad to bet 10 and 30%. And specifically, I said it exposes you to the risk of being check raised without much incremental return. And you can kind of see that manifests itself here with pocket jacks at pot, which is a little bit, it's a different bet sizing, but you see the same phenomenon appear, which is that the risk of being check raised, even though you get called by worse hands a lot, the risk of being check raised and losing the entire pot is a credible enough threat to eliminate the kind of positive EV profile of jamming pocket jacks here, which again I do think is quite interesting and worth harping on about for just one more second. So I just wanted to visually contrast this in the same video. This was the 1-to-1 SPR. So the same ranges, same inputs, check. What's the solution after check, right? So here with the 2-to-1 SPR, where you introduce the risk of being check raised, you're betting the same size, you're up against the same defending frequency, but now of course you have the risk of being check raised and losing the entire pot. And jacks is now, indifferent between betting and checking. And here at a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio, if we go ahead and take a quick look at the EV of betting pocket jacks versus checking it, the EV of jamming, it's very competitive. They are actually very close, even though it's pure jamming pocket jacks. The EV of jamming pocket jacks is 87.6. EV of checking is 87.57. I always find this fascinating. Like this is another thing that I'm actually going to digress even further on. So this video is taking a bit more of a direction. This is for some of you who use Peel Solver a lot, including myself. So one of the things that happen is because we are humans, we're very visual learners. So we see things and we kind of extract that as a pattern. And this is actually a mistake I made, and I'm actually going to keep this in the video on purpose because I think it shows how you can be someone who likes to use tools and then you can take things too far. So I assumed that without checking, I assumed that the EV of betting pocket jacks would be materially higher than the EV of checking it at this 1-to-1 SPR. But of course, they're almost identical. 87.6 and 87.57 are immaterial. The EV difference there is negligible. But when we see this graph, this graphic, right? Aces and jacks pure bet. So it's jacks isn't mixing. I assume like when jacks isn't mixing at all, that the EV is higher. That's why it's using it as a pure strategy. But of course, that wasn't the case. This is the difference between a program and a human. To me, jacks should be a mix in this instance, right? To me, it should be a mix because the EV is like basically the same. 87.60 and 87.57 are almost identical. So it should just mix. But at the computer, it's like, no, 87.6 is higher. So I'm going to pure bet this in. So it's just something that you want to be careful of as you kind of use these programs. That's why I think the strategy and EV tab can be quite valuable to you. So that you can actually understand like how sensitive is this hand to my opponent's range of strategies. Like if my opponent's maybe a little bit too tight and he calls without the hands that I beat at the right frequency, the EV of jamming pocket jacks is going to very quickly be destroyed because checking will be better, right? Checking will be constant. and the EV of jamming it will go down because you're going to get called by worse less often, right? So to me, if the EV was materially higher with jamming pocket jacks, I would have done so, right? But of course, the EV is not materially higher with jamming pocket jacks. So I kind of took this graphic to mean that it was, and that's just not the case. So it's just something to be aware of when you're using tools like PO Solver, or any other tool for that matter. Make sure that you're paying somewhat close attention, I think, to the EV of the actual play, and not just whether the play is done all the time or not, because you can get exposed to mistakes that way. All right, so we will go ahead and stop this for the versus bet strategy for out of position, and then we will go ahead and look at the versus bet strategy for in position now. I did digress a lot, but I think that there was something there for people and that was valuable. So we're going to keep my mistake in the video. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and explain the in position versus bet strategy now. And it's pretty easy for this one. We are betting to 100% of the pot size. We're not jamming for 2x pot. That answer has come out. And so when we evaluate betting pot, our bluffs are below the bottom of the in position player's range. Bottom of the in position player's range is 7s. So 6s, 5s, and 4s are our bluffs. And we're expecting a 50% fold, which is exactly what we get. I think in the context of this video, this is pretty consistent with everything you've seen so far. Doesn't really need too much explaining. Aces is a jam. None of the other hands qualify as jams for value. They are offsets as bluffs. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at the versus shove strategy here in the next part. So I will explain that in just a minute. All right, so now we're going to deal with the versus raise strategy and the raising strategy as the player who's making that raise. So I think it's important that you guys have a nice set of tools for how to deal with that. So first things first, we just think about it like a bet. Okay, so we're gonna stumble through this a little bit. This is somewhat complex, to be honest, but I'm going to try to simplify it as best I can. So we want to think about it just like a bet, just like a normal bet. So the raise size is to 200. The total pot already has 200 in it. Our opponent bet pot, and then there was 1x pot in the middle prior to our opponent's bet. So there's 200 in the middle now. We're going to risk 200 when we make our bet. So it's 200 over 400. So when we're evaluating a hand that has 0 EV, like pocket 7s, okay, as long as our opponent folds more than 50% of the time, pocket 7s will start to generate profits when it jams, okay? Because pocket 7s is essentially a fold versus the shove. And even a hand like pocket jacks up here, which is calling most of the time, the EV is still 0. It's still important to understand that the EV of pocket jacks is 0, okay? So at this point in the hand, any one of these bluff catching hands will generate a profit as long as the total fold percentage versus the shove is more than 50%. It doesn't matter what combos get folded. As long as the fold percentage is greater than 50%, okay, as long as the fold percentage is greater than 50%, the EV of shoving pocket 7s will turn positive, okay? Because pocket 7s can't beat pocket 6s or 5s or 4s, which is what's being bluffed, okay, unless it jams, right? If it doesn't jam, it doesn't have a positive expectation against 6s, 5s, and 4s because it's going to fold. Essentially, the EV is 0. Whether it calls, folds, or raises, it doesn't matter. The EV is 0. So again, it's very important to understand this, that the EV of pocket 7s in the call strategy is identical to the EV of pocket 7s in the fold strategy. They're both 0, right? So if the bettor folds more than 50% at this point, pocket 7s would generate profits. So the aggregate range of the bettor, even though these bluffs are technically below pocket 7s, right? Even though these bluffs are below the bluffs of the alternative of its competitor, these hands do count as a part of the overall range. So I do think that this can be just a difficult concept for people to grasp because it feels like it conflicts with this. It feels like it conflicts with, let's just go ahead and check and take a quick look at betting pot here. It feels like it conflicts with this, where we would expect a 50% fold. But of course, the difference is if pocket 7s doesn't bet in this instance, if it just checks, if it does nothing, if pocket 7s does nothing, then the EV of pocket 7s is not 0. Okay. Understand that the EV of checking pocket 7s right now is 40. Okay. It's quite high. And that's because pocket 7s beats 6s, 5s, and 4s. Okay. So in this way, that can be helpful to understand. Like in the other example, when you're evaluating jamming, the EV of pocket sevens is actually 0 at that point. And here it's actually 40 because you beat all of these bluffs. This is EV that you will capture by not betting. You beat these hands, right? So when you jam pocket sevens already beat these hands. So these hands do not count in the calculation, right? Because pocket sevens could have beaten those hands by doing nothing. Okay, but when we bet 100 as the out of position player, if pocket sevens does nothing, it doesn't have any EV. Okay, if pocket sevens does nothing, it doesn't beat pocket sixes, fives, and fours. It has to do something. It has to call, and then of course it's going to lose to pocket aces. And so if you shove pocket sevens at this point in the hand and start generating profits, that's a problem essentially, and that represents a disequilibrium. And so when pocket sevens jams here for 200 into 400, the overall aggregate fold percentage does in fact need to be 50%, regardless of where these bluffs are. And as a result, we see this kind of like beautiful image here where we're defending an exactly, very close to an exact 50-50 strategy. And we've got aces at the top, kings and queens as bluff catchers, because of course aces is the hand that jams. And the fold percentages down here with sixes, fives, and fours. If this looks a little bit off to you, keep in mind that these hands are not equally weighted in the range. They went into different places first, right? So these hands just represent different weights. So it might look a little bit like, how's this 50-50 if like these three hands fold and these three hands don't pure call? It's like, well, these hands have different weights in the range, of course. So with that, hopefully you guys get a little bit more insight into how the raising strategy works and how the versus raise strategy works. And it can make things a little bit clearer for some of you guys. So thank you. And I'll see you guys in the next one.